So, I wanted to talk a little bit about data illusions. I know we often talk about data hallucinations, and many of you, especially when it comes to AI, the hallucinations that they have. But I want to talk a little bit today about exposing misconceptions around AI and analytics. So, over the next 2 days, you're hearing lots of stuff about how awesome data is, how awesome AI is. And I wanted to just have a quick quick session about maybe what are some of the myths that exist. The QR code there are my slides. So if you want copies of what I present, this is probably the easiest way. Instead of you pulling out your phone and taking photos, you can do that right off the bat. And if you don't get your phone out right now, don't worry, I have it at the end as well. So let's get started and let's talk a little bit about that. So who am I? I'm going to get through that. I want to start with some logical fallacies. So when I was really, really young, my father, who is a professor of philosophy, sat me down when I was 5 years old and was teaching me about logic as a 5 year old. And he said, "This is what logic is, Rochelle. And this is why logic doesn't always make sense." And so he said, "Okay, there is a boat. The boat is in water. There is a hole in the boat. Therefore, there is a hole in the water." And as a 5 year old, I remember going, "This makes no sense." But it's logical. The logic follows. And it's always stuck with me. And I think sometimes when we're talking about data and AI and logic, and this just makes sense, we have to really do a bit of a gut check and go, does it really make sense, right? With the context that we know. So today, I just want to talk about a couple of things. Today, I'm going to talk about myths. What are the myths that are out there? Some common myths that I often see. How does that impact what we do with the AI and the analytics? I want to talk about a realistic, pragmatic approach to AI, and we've been hearing a lot about this all day. I want to dispel some of these myths, and then I want to talk about some practical strategies. So the first thing is the myth is, and we heard this. So Shadi, thank you so much for the segue. AI and data analytics will solve all my problems. I'll have this and there will never be any more problems. Everything will be data driven, it'll be great. It is that silver bullet mindset, right? And the fact of the matter is, we've heard that it does solve some problems, but you still will have others. It will not solve all your problems. And most importantly, we've heard this a lot today. We need to align it with our business goals and objectives. Those strategic goals and objectives and the quality as well needs to be really high around data. We've heard this before, so I'm just repeating a lot of what I've heard before. We need, though, to also be really careful about over-reliance on AI and data, and that sometimes that can also lead to misguided outcomes, right? So again, remember that gut check, that logic. Okay? Hole in the water. If you don't remember anything about Rochelle, she was the one who was saying there's a hole in the water, right? So again, some areas where we're seeing this, I'm sure you've seen some of these examples. Amazon had a hiring tool that basically they did, and they used data that was for the past 10 years. And it basically over-relied and assumed that most great people to hire were men because that's historically who they hired. So we have to be careful about that bias. And Tesla, autopilot, need I say more? Basically, we want to make sure that we're not over-relying on these systems and that we still have humans in the loop. We've been hearing that a lot as well. The next myth I want to do is that more data equals better insights. We're around data. Is more better? Sometimes, but not always. We basically can say for sure that volume doesn't necessarily guarantee insights, right? When we look at sort of a graph, there is data quality and there's data quantity, and they are not necessarily the same. So if we want effective insights, we have to make sure we have the right data, but also that it's not just a lot of volume. It has to be relevant. Is the data relevant to the problem we are trying to solve? More does not make it better. And again, sometimes volume can also obscure, hide, dilute critical insights. Where do we see this? recent US elections, lots of polls, lots of data. We said earlier, were they right? Was it about the sampling? I mean, there's lots of people pointing fingers, and I'm sure we're going to be doing a lot of postmortems on that one. There were AI models during the COVID crisis. They were being used to understand how do we diagnose it. And some of them still could not figure out what was going on. More data, lots of data, and it still had a really hard time. There were also COVID-19 vaccination surveys. And again, there was that big data paradox. Everybody who was responding was saying, yeah, this is awesome, but there were a lot of people who just didn't respond. So who isn't part of our data set is really critical and something to think about. So if you really want to achieve better ones, focus on the data quality and make sure that the volume and the insights you have are related to the problems you're trying to solve. The last one that I want to highlight is AI and analytics can replace human judgment. This kind of plays into a lot of people thinking, I can just rely on AI, I can just rely on the data, that's going to make my decision for me, it'll be really clear, no human is necessary, or even very senior leaders going, we don't need people, let's just get rid of them because we can have it automated. And what we found is it isn't really good, at least not yet, at autonomous in decision making. We want to really make sure around that decision-making process that there are humans in the loop and that there is still value in human intuition and human ethics. And we've seen a lot of times when that hasn't come up. And so I want to really highlight that we need to still have people there. Because intuition sometimes is it really hard to model or is hard to model. So how do you model that intuition? We may get better at it, but right now there's still a value there. Basically, human oversight can refine AI outcomes. I often think of AI as not artificial intelligence, but augmented intelligence. It is augmenting my own intelligence, the intelligence of humans. So I think this is a really good thing to think about. We're seeing this has been proven in medical, sort of the medical field with imaging diagnostics. They find that AI combined with radiologists gives better, basically, outcome, better accuracy, and it reduces both false positives and false negatives. And so it is the combination, not just one or the other, right? Another example is we have some financial institutions, financial fraud detection. So a lot of the machine learning can identify lots of fraud things, but they still have human oversight to make sure that it makes sense. Maybe there's some unusual patterns, but then they go, no, this is not something that is immediately fraud. How many of us have been traveling and all of a sudden our credit card doesn't work and we're all frustrated? Yep. So lots of us have had that experience. So sometimes it just takes a human to look at it. So practically, how do we make this work? How do we effectively integrate AI into our business strategies and make sure that it is aligned? The first thing, as I've been hearing over and over today, is let's align with our goals and our objectives. That's the first thing we have to do. It has to support that. What is the end goal? Why are we doing this? What is the business value? The second piece is ensuring data quality. But I would also ask us to dig a little bit deeper. We've been hearing a lot about accuracy and what is it, but how do you define quality? We've been throwing this term around a lot today, right? But how do you define quality? And is that quality just by the input and where it is collected? Or is the quality also by how it is being used and consumed and what you do with it? How do you evaluate the quality of your data? And you need to guarantee that the insights you see are basically relevant to how you plan to use it. I've actually seen lots of data that was quite accurate, but useless. So making sure that it actually is something you can use and can drive decisions is really critical. And that will help you perhaps avoid some misguided outcomes. we still need to have the human in the loop. We still need human oversight. I teach courses on artificial intelligence. The biggest thing I need to tell my students is verify and validate. I also see, interesting, for many of you, you may be like, data's crappy when it comes to data and analytics and analysis, because that's what you know. In the domains that we are experts in, we basically very quickly see how kind of crappy AI and artificial intelligence can be. But in domains that we do not know, we overvalue the results that we get. I've seen people who, when it comes to coding, will go, this is crappy code, but then they'll do AI for a marketing plan and go, this is an amazing plan, right? Because they know very little about marketing. And so just keep that in mind, just as you have that critical factor, critical thinking about your own domain. When you get to other domains, you might just want to sit back first and go, how could this be better? Is this true? Does this make sense? And maybe even pass it by somebody who is an expert in that area. The last thing is you want to balance sort of intuition and AI. So combine that human intuition. I still believe there's value in us humans. I don't think that's going away anytime soon. I don't know, maybe I'm idealistic and I just want to make sure there's still a job for me. That's possible. But I think that we all have something there that is wonderful and valuable. And I want to make sure that there are optimal results between the two. I firmly believe all the artificial, and Shandi talked about this, it is a combination of a variety of things, and that there are people who have knowledge that goes in many ways deeper than some of these systems. Yes, billions, trillions, hundreds of trillions of parameters, and yet still it can't sometimes identify the things that for us seem quite simple to see. So in general, how do you effectively implement AI? I recommend recognize some of these myths. And some of you may be like, oh, Rochelle, I don't have this problem. Great. But maybe your colleague does. Maybe someone in your team does. Maybe your boss does. Somebody there in your organization does. So try to recognize these myths and maybe give them some direction, guide them gently as to how they can do that. The second piece is implement more responsible strategies. So again, what are the ethical implications? How do you do things responsibly? I love Shandi that you basically explained that sometimes stick with what you got. Like you don't have to reinvent the wheel. If something's working well, continue to do that. I also know I was talking to someone recently and they were talking about, oh, we're going to use AI for this amazing assessment thing, and we want to do this. And I was like, well, what you're doing sounds kind of like a quiz. I'm a teacher. Couldn't you just use like a quiz or survey tool? Do you need to use a LLM just to do that? Because they were like worried about the outcome. And I'm like, we've had technology that delivers a pretty consistent number and score for decades, and it does it pretty well. Why are we using a tool that doesn't make sense? As someone said earlier, if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? Let's not make sure we're doing that with the LLMs. Let's use the appropriate tool for the appropriate thing we want to do. And finally, let's focus on some realistic applications. We've been hearing this throughout the day. So these are also some things that we've been hearing all day. Pilots, keep it small, start small, do small things, have quick wins or quick failures, fail fast. These are all the things that people have been talking about that I think make a wonderful thing around success. Because success can also happen even after a failure. It is not just always about having successful outcomes. So prioritize the things that are practical, that are doable, that will test your hypotheses and make sure that it works and it goes well. So with that, I am done. It is a short one, but I have all my resources here. I want to thank you for sitting. Fill out your surveys. Please do that. You can connect with me. You can get the slides. And also our Circles of AI, we actually have an AI readiness quiz that you can actually use as well to understand your AI readiness score. So I thank everyone, and I will take a little bit of a break. Or does anyone have any questions for me? Not. Give you some time, and you can just start clapping. It's all good. Awesome. Thank you. Okay, great. Great.